name is Ruth Duerr. I've been a Ronin since 2015, but I'm also actually a member of a number of other groups, including the Earth Science Information Partnership, which is just now celebrating its 25th year. And it actually is a nonprofit organization whose mission is to basically make data matter. And it's kind of a brain trust because it's basically a group of earth science data professionals from all walks of life, including agencies, academia. We have a number of corporate developers, etc. So it's a lot of data archives, a lot of application developers, a lot of tool system developers, and data providers. And while it's mostly earth science, I will say that over the past several years, it's actually become much more broad in scope in terms of what science disciplines it covers, but it's primarily earth and environmental science. And they have a number of different types of partners. Mostly I'm showing this because you can see the range of them and that they're not all just US. For example, Manaki Wenua Landcare Research is in New Zealand. I'm sure I didn't say that correctly. And Offscope is obviously in Australia. But one thing you all should note as Ronin and prospective Ronins is that the Ronin Institute is a member of ESIP. And you can see by the little logo right here under the type 2 organizations that are members. In any case, ESIP runs, it's entirely volunteer run. And it runs on this concept of basically clusters and committees. And clusters basically are rather informal. And they basically form when a bunch of people get together and say that they need to or want to discuss something about some topic. And that's pretty much all it takes. And then all of a sudden you get a Zoom space, a wiki, and some other facilities to help make that conversation go well. And so it's got a number of different clusters. And the work that I'm talking about here today is work in the sustainable data management cluster down here at the bottom right. And it's that cluster formed because ESIP, with its 140 or so members, organizations, has a number of archives in it, and making archives sustainable is always an issue, I guess I should say, because funding for data management is not something that is easy to come by. And so we have this cluster called the Sustainable Data Management Cluster, and its purpose is to really try and make it easier to keep the data that is created by research going. And so it started a few years ago as this project to take a look at a lot of the principles that have been coming out of various communities related to data and data management, and try and figure out what that really means if you wanted to be a repository that was implementing those. And so the three things that you may have heard of are the FAIR principles: findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. The trust principles, which are all about repositories becoming transparent, responsible, having a user focus, sustainable, and having reasonable technologies. And then the CARE principles, which came out of the Global Indigenous Data Alliance. And one thing to note is that data repositories are kind of an interesting thing, because while they publish and archive data and make that data available to other users for further use, and they try and curate that data to keep it alive for the future and to make it easier to find, they actually are kind of an interface or a layer between the research community, be they agency researchers, commercial researchers, or academics, and the broader public. And so if you think about the three sets of principles that I very briefly introduced here, the care principles, the fair principles, and the trust principles, really fair is about making your data basically interoperable and findable and accessible. Trust is about making your repositories trustworthy, and care is about taking care of people. Now, care came out of the indigenous data communities, but there are more underrepresented groups than just the indigenous communities. But the care principles were originally promulgated by the indigenous communities, and probably that set of principles should apply primarily to those groups and not be misappropriated outside of that group. But I will note that even as the care principles were being first put together, I was talking to Stephanie and Maui, who were some of the principal organizers of the Global Indigenous Data Alliance, about how really a lot of the care principles are something that you really should apply to any kind of community. But but so that's probably what I guess what I would say is work that needs to be done, is to expand the care principles beyond the indigenous community to include, for example, other kinds of underrepresented groups. In any case, the ESIP cluster, having bitten off this large task of trying to figure out what fair care and trust means for repositories, quickly came to the conclusion that that was a lot to bite off in one go, and so decided to look at the care principles first, because those were the ones that the repositories had the most question about. And so at that point, the goal was to understand how to actually implement the care principles in repositories. And that's what we've been working on ever since. And it's been a few years that we've been doing that now. I note there's 2 messages in the chat, but I do not see them. So if somebody could let me know if there's questions or something I should be answering, that would be great.
No, just some comments by Keith.
Okay, great. In any case, these are the care principles. They are to make sure that whatever you're doing is to the collective benefit of the indigenous people involved, that you are taking responsibility for having positive relationships with those people, for ensuring that they can understand and have access to those data. So that's expanding the capabilities and capacities of those communities, and ensuring that you're responsive to the factor that maybe their worldviews and languages are not the same as yours, for example. Under authority control, the issue there is to ensure that those communities actually, their rights are being respected, that they have the right to govern and what's being done with their data, and that you're behaving in an ethical way. So those are the care principles. I will be making these slides available, so you don't have to memorize any of this. Why can I not? Okay, there we go. So the ESIP cluster has been working through actually these principles to come up with a set of here's the activities to implement them. And this is the list, and there's no way I can go through this list. There's actually 2 pages here. One is about knowing your communities and all the things you as a repository should be doing in order to understand that community, both on the provider and the user side. There's a number of things that you should be doing to communicate with those communities and perform outreach, and a number of things related to the kinds of protocols that you need to set up in order to ensure that the processes that you're using inside your repository are CARE compliant. And last but not least, as you might expect, there's always technical things that need to be done to ensure that you're treating the data appropriately. For example, that your metadata about your data actually is using community vetted vocabularies and perhaps community languages. And that if there are things like permissions needed from the community, that you're recording those permissions and associating them with the data, etc. So the whole thing here is all about making sure that you're doing what you've agreed to do with the community, that you've been working with the community. You haven't just flown in and decided to extract their knowledge and use it without their permission. And the process that we've been using to do this is that we've been working with the group that originally created the CARE principles, which are now under the Global Indigenous Data Alliance. And so these were specific people that we have had a variety of telecons with: Stephanie Carroll, Maui Hudson, etc. We're continuing to work with those groups. And actually, every time I put the slide up, the number of people on the slide has to get larger, because actually Stephanie and that crew have these are really the main writing type partners on this, but there's a much larger group in the background, is I guess what I'm saying. In any case, so the cluster has been working with Indigenous communities, like I said, fairly globally, though primarily from the North America, Australia, New Zealand, a little bit of Africa, and the Northern European groups on this. And we've mapped these activities that are repository activities to the actual CARE principles. And this is a draft of that mapping. We are in the midst of writing a paper that's documenting this. The point being that repositories globally are wondering how to implement the CARE principles, and now that we have the set of activities they should be kind of doing, we need to publish a paper so that people have access to kind of sort of a checklist of what they can be doing. And so this is the mapping, and like I said, we're in the middle of a paper. And our next steps are we are vetting the mapping and the activities with the Indigenous communities we've been working with. We need to complete the paper and submit it. And I have to admit that the GIDA folks from the Global Indigenous Data Alliance really want us to create an interactive web version of this. And we'll see if we can do that or not. In any case, this is what the paper will undoubtedly look like. We're in the midst of writing it right at the moment. And And we hope to publish it here in the next month or two. We will obviously publish it with a preprint first. And that is all I wanted to say on that.